All right, Chuck, now to an I-Team exclusive. If you think your bill for heating oil is too high, well, it just might be. For the first time, New Yorkers get to see and hear heating oil swindlers as they cheated churches, schools, and hospitals out of tens of millions of dollars. Tonight, in part one of our series, Heating Oil Heist, Chief Investigative Reporter Jonathan Dietz talks to a heating oil delivery man who says this is happening right now. Jonathan joining us now with the first in our series of reports. Jonathan.
Yeah, Stacey, the practice of heating oil companies shorting your tank is widespread. That's not just according to law enforcement sources. That's according to industry insiders, including a driver making deliveries today. All tell us customers are routinely ripped off. And for the first time, we can show you recordings that highlight this problem. You're looking at what law enforcement officials say is a heating oil theft in progress. It's called shorting. This delivery man has the meter running, but they say he's really just blowing air into the customer's tank. Watch. When the meter hits 250 gallons, he flips a switch. And they say only then the oil starts flowing. The customer has no idea that they were billed for 250 gallons of air.
It is happening to this day. It is being done.
This oil delivery man, speaking on condition we not reveal his identity, says it's a scam that has been going on for years. Don't believe him? Listen to oil delivery workers mock victims they ripped off time and again.
I used to make him steal the oil from his own tank. He didn't even know what he was doing.
News 4 has obtained audio recordings from past law enforcement investigations. Heating oil company drivers, dispatchers, and supervisors brazenly talking about the hundreds, even thousands of gallons stolen at each delivery. They steal from courthouses.
When you used to go to the 6 hour, I used to go through the tank. There hasn't been a complaint, so I'm pumping off at Queens Family Court. You got to see these motherfuckers over here.
From police precincts.
Yeah, all right. You could probably do about 50. All right.
From residential buildings and hospitals.
I did 3. They told him he did 7.
Where was this? Stop. I don't know.
To that hospital that he went to yesterday. It's not fair. It's not right.
This driver says while some businesses are honest, too many are stealing.
Nobody's paying attention. It's the whole mentality. It's a mess.
And it's been a mess for decades. Arrests as recently as 2015. 9 companies and dozens of workers charged. Many pleaded guilty. And dozens of rigged trucks seized. Experts say these past arrests have not curbed the problem.
They're stealing, such a high volume of oil from customers. The whole company's got to be involved.
Dan Brownell, a former prosecutor, now heads the city's Business Integrity Commission. He says to stop this systematic stealing, the city council must give his agency oversight powers, like what was done years ago to dramatically cut down on mafia corruption in garbage collection.
The council needs to wake up. Unless that kind of threat is hanging over the heads of corrupt companies and individuals, this is not going to stop.
But shorting oil isn't the only scam. Insiders tell us another deceitful trick of the trade is called blending. That's when waste oil, like used motor oil, is secretly mixed in with heating oil.
Who knows what other liquids are poured into that? Is antifreeze in there? Nobody knows, because none of that is being inspected.
Hideous fraud of the worst order.
Bill Wachtel filed a class action lawsuit against some heating oil firms, alleging thousands of buildings have been cheated.
There have been over 1 billion gallons of adulterated oil delivered into the metropolitan area.
And with records he's obtained of thousands of past oil deliveries, Wachtel says he can show dirty blended oil made it into the furnaces of buildings like Mount Sinai Hospital, with records showing as much as 30% of past fuel deliveries were actually dirty waste oil.
It sends up into the air contaminants, carcinogens, so it's hurting the public. And on top of which, the person who's burning that fuel is getting an inferior product. It doesn't burn as efficiently.
In response to the lawsuit, some individual firms have denied blending waste oil or delivering adulterated oil.
We want to see this rooted out more than anybody else.
And the head of the Heating Oil Association denies schemes like shorting are a widespread problem.
We're not talking about every oil company on the corner who was perpetrating these crimes. Again, I'll repeat myself that it was isolated to a small segment, a small sub-segment of this industry.
There's a big problem here.
Our insider says some firms are making millions in extra cash, with drivers getting their extra cut as well.
$50,000 a week.
Cold cash as consumers get burned.
Put 1,700 gallons in a 1,000-gallon tank.
Exactly, yeah, it'll be a Halloween Christmas for real.
More than 3,500 buildings across the city still rely on heating oil deliveries. Officials say for many, they will likely be ripped off this winter season. Tomorrow at 6, part 2 of Heating Oil Heist. Chris Glorioso will show you exactly how the crooks steal from their customers, victims that include one local church. Jonathan Dienst, News 4 New York.
Eye-opening, Jonathan. Thank you. Thank you. The I-Team's investigating your heating bill and a fraud that will send shivers down your spine. Recordings obtained by the I-Team show how heating oil companies scheme to shortchange New Yorkers. In part 2 of our series, Heating Oil Heist, Chris Glorioso introduces you to victims and reveals just how they were ripped off and left in the cold by companies paid to keep them warm. Chris?
Well, Chuck, this series is about stealing heating oil, but you don't have to use heating oil in your home to be a victim. Crooked fuel truck drivers have scammed public schools, courthouses, and hospitals. That means taxpayers are being ripped off too, not to mention houses of worship.
It takes a special kind of dishonesty to cheat a church. At the Church of the Ascension on the Upper West Side, heating oil thieves might as well have been stealing from the poor box when they billed for hundreds of gallons never delivered. Investigators say these driver logs show an oil delivery man stealing 360 gallons from the church in 2015 and 200 gallons stolen the prior month. Jan Dugan is a devout parishioner.
What bothers me most is these people exhibit no conscience.
And this church is far from the only victim. The I-Team obtained recordings from past law enforcement investigations which depict the practice of oil shorting at buildings across New York City. Listen as dispatchers and oil truck drivers banter and laugh about ripping customers off.
How stupid he is. We wanted to learn how to pump the oil, right? So I used to make him steal the oil from his own tank. He didn't even know what he was doing. 1,500 MUL, right? Yep. 100.
Hey, you gotta see what else stuff I got. I got Marcus Darby. The homeless house.
In that last recording, a driver boasts about cheating this Brooklyn homeless shelter out of oil. That means he cheated poor people like Frankie Garcia, a chef who became homeless after undergoing open heart surgery and losing his job.
The people that do this, that's not right, you know, because they already got money.
I could easily say it's going on right now.
Dominic Albergo is a former investigator with the New York City Business Integrity Commission, known as BIC. 2 years ago, he and his colleagues shut down 9 heating oil companies and arrested more than 50 employees. At the time, city investigators estimated the rogue oil companies stole an average of 10% of all their deliveries between 2014 and 2015. That would mean dirty oil drivers stole almost 7 million gallons from private buildings, more than 3 million gallons from New York City public schools, more than 280,000 gallons from the Catholic Archdiocese, and more than 100,000 gallons from the police department.
You're talking a substantial amount of money that went into this corrupt industry.
So how did so many buildings get robbed blind? The answer is right here in the standard oil meter on the back of every oil truck. One way oil thieves short is by rigging those meters to pump air as if it were oil. A metal ball right here is supposed to block the air from making the meter numbers spin, but a devious trick involving a simple magnet can lift that ball and let the air flow.
I want to steal, so I'll use this magnet.
Albergo even showed me how oil thieves inflate your bill.
They use a magnet like this to open a valve.
I was able to get the meter to falsely register air as if it were oil. The meter numbers started spinning.
While that meter is running, building owners think their tank is being filled with fuel, but it's not. It's being filled with thin air, and they're paying for it.
You showed it yourself how a little magnet, a $60 magnet, and we stole a couple of 100 gallons right here. And, you know, you're not an oil guy.
Should we trust our heating oil drivers?
I think you should trust the companies that are out there.
Rocco Lacertosa heads a trade group that represents about 30 New York oil dealers. He says the theft problem is being overblown, and he estimates less than 3% of his industry engaged in oil shorting.
They have no place in this industry. They have no place in this city.
Back at the Church of the Ascension, Jan Dugan is convinced the city of New York needs to do more to root out the dishonest oil companies.
It is appalling to think that people are being ripped off in some form or fashion.
The church's head pastor, Father Dan Carney, wrote this letter asking City Council to pass a bill giving the Business Integrity Commission more power to regulate and license heating oil drivers. For a year, that bill has been tied up in the Sanitation Committee. Committee Chair Antonio Reynoso says powerful interests have lined up against the law, but he made a pledge to the I-Team.
Will you guarantee this bill is going to be put for a vote before next winter?
Yes, I guarantee this bill will be put to a vote.
Councilmember Reynoso told us he does not yet have the votes to pass that bill that would force heating oil companies to play by new rules. Well, one New Yorker is not waiting for City Council to take action. Tomorrow, Chief Investigative Reporter Jonathan Dienst speaks with a man who's taking heating oil companies to court, claiming a different variety of fuel fraud is rampant. Back to you.
All right, fascinating stuff, Chris. Thank you very much.
All week, our I-Team has been taking a hard look into heating oil heists in New York City. Tonight in Part 3, dirty secrets from inside the internal company records and driver logs that may detail not only past ripoffs, but also a practice that can ruin boilers and pollute the air we breathe. Chief Investigative Reporter Jonathan Dienst reveals it to us now. Jonathan?
Yes, it's called blending, and officials say mixing a percentage of properly recycled oil into home heating oil can help the environment. But insiders allege some firms are cutting corners, blending dirty waste oil, mixing sludge into home heating oil. Many customers have no idea what's really getting delivered to their homes or businesses.
That original location.
This video, shot in connection with a pending class action lawsuit, shows heating oil trucks backing into a waste oil facility in Brooklyn. The allegation raised in that lawsuit that dirty oil, like used motor oil, has been improperly blended into heating oil to increase profits for some oil companies, all while ripping off unsuspecting customers.
The stuff that comes out of Jiffy Lube is ending up in the burners of hospitals and schools.
Attorney Bill Wachtel claims this improper blending is a big problem that's been going on for years.
The city of New York is the single largest victim of this hideous fraud.
Officials say this is how a blending scheme works. Fuel trucks fill their tanks with clean heating oil. Then they remove a few thousand gallons to be sold on the black market. The void that's left in their tank is filled at a waste oil facility with a cheaper, dirtier fuel, like used motor oil, then sold and delivered to buildings across New York City. Investigators say the mix can include dirty waste oil or recycled fuel, which is allowed for certain deliveries, but the head of the Business Integrity Commission says city contracts are clear. Used, waste, recycled, re-refined sludge or residue of fuel oils is not acceptable.
We had surveillance where we would see the Jiffy Lube or the Valvoline waste oil truck come to the location in Northwest Queens and drop off oil, and then less than an hour later, a regular heating oil truck would come to pick up oil.
This fuel truck driver, speaking on condition of anonymity, says improper blending is a pretty common occurrence.
It's been going on a long time, and everybody knows it's been going on a long time.
Wachtel points to driver logs dating to 2009 that he says paint a troubling history.
We know of at least 2,500 specific locations, which within a 2-year period, each of which received contaminated, adulterated oil.
Since no criminal charges for blending, past or present, have been brought, the I-Team is not naming any company seen on these videos. But a unanimous appeals court ruled last year that Wachtel's lawsuit against several firms can move forward, saying blending would reduce the quality and the value of the delivered oil. Several heating oil firms insist it is legal and proper to mix in treated used oil, and the Heating Oil Association says only a small percentage of bad actors mislead customers.
This is, again, perpetrated by a small group of individuals, not the entire industry.
But Wachtel says his research shows dirty blended fuels were repeatedly delivered to churches and schools in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan. And the Business Integrity Commissioner says he has information to support those allegations.
In areas of the city where asthma rates are some of the highest in the country, it's unconscionable. It's unconscionable.
113,000 visits to local hospitals because of asthma. Well, part of that is because we're pumping dirty oil into our buildings.
City Controller Scott Stringer says the city is losing millions of dollars because of what law enforcement officials say is happening in past videos like these. Stolen oil being pumped from one truck to another to make room for dirty blended oil.
This is a very serious healthcare issue, has dire economic consequences, but it also really impacts the most vulnerable, the people who are living in an apartment who have no idea that they're being poisoned.
So if this is so harmful, why haven't state or federal prosecutors moved in to stop blending schemes? The Manhattan DA has said the costs of this kind of criminal investigation can be staggering. Years of work for teams of investigators and auditors. DA Vance has said increased regulation is key. So why hasn't the city council acted? Our Chris Glorioso has that answer to that question tomorrow in part 4 of Heating Oil Heist. Back
All
to
right, Jonathan, thank you. Very, very fascinating series. Yes. This week, the I-Team exposed the devious ways some oil companies have cheated their customers, driving up their heating bills. Well, tonight, in the 4th and final part of our series, Heating Oil Heist, Chris Glorioso reports on the plan to crack down on fuel truck fraud and how the heating oil industry has successfully squashed that reform.
Yeah, you know what? I'm pumping off the Queen Stanley Court. You gotta see these motherfuckers over here.
You are listening to Heating Oil employees as they schemed to rip off New Yorkers.
Put 1,700 gallons in a 1,000-gallon tank.
Sometimes the recordings show customers complaining they were charged for more oil than their tanks can even hold.
You couldn't get 275 gallons of oil in that tank if your life depended on it.
It's going on right now, and it will continue to go on.
Dominic Albergo is a former investigator with BIC, the city's Business Integrity Commission. In 2015, he busted dozens of fuel truck drivers for illegally rigging their oil meters. 2 years later, Albergo is blasting the city council for failing to vote on Bill 1268, which would give BIC authority to license oil firms and kick corrupt companies out.
Well, I would tell the city councilors that I did my job. I showed the culture of corruption in the oil industry. And it's their job to protect the citizens of New York. And that's their job now to vote on that bill.
So why are lawmakers keeping the heating oil bill on ice? Initially, some of them didn't want to talk about it, so we tracked them down in City Hall stairwells.
Councilmember, can I ask you, why don't you want to talk about this bill, though?
Oh, well, actually, my time now, I have to go to a meeting.
Councilmember Vanessa Gibson later told us she opposes licensing heating oil companies under BIC because new licensing fees could force firms to cut jobs. Councilmember Costa Constantinides made a similar point, adding he doesn't believe BIC will be a good regulator.
What are your current concerns with the heating oil bill specifically?
Again, making sure that we protect consumers and making sure that we protect...
Why don't you think it will protect consumers?
I think there's a number of things we're looking at.
Specifically, why don't you think this one will protect consumers?
I've said my piece. Thank you so much.
We want these bad actors out of this industry more than anybody else.
Rocco Lacertosa represents about 30 heating oil dealers and says most heating oil companies are honest, but he makes no excuses for lobbying hard against a bill to license his members. He says licensing fees would drive up costs and hit you in the pocketbook.
So this is bad for the consumer. It's bad for the company. It's bad for the city.
Has your association made any political donations to council members who have a say in this bill?
We've made political donations throughout the years.
Have you accepted any donations from the heating oil industry?
There are a number of donations that are out there that I have taken from various sources.
Records show Constantinides' 2017 campaign took $2,500 from the heating oil industry, but he and his colleagues say political donations do not sway their votes. Despite that, Councilmember Antonio Reynoso, who chairs the Sanitation Committee, told us special interests have influenced the process.
You could bring this to a vote.
I could bring it to a vote, yes.
Why won't you?
I just can't. Right now, the parties involved, including the Teamsters, the industry, council members, and myself, and BIC, have not come to an agreement as to what this legislation should look like.
I'm troubled by hearing that the Teamsters Union won't agree to it, and because of that, it can't go forward. I mean, first of all, that's not the way democracy works.
Teamsters Secretary-Treasurer Demos Dimopoulos sent the I-Team a statement saying his union has zero tolerance for corruption, but the problem of oil shorting is better tackled through law enforcement and the Department of Consumer Affairs.
I'm not in full support.
Councilmember Andy King agrees with the Teamsters and opposes licensing heating oil companies. It's worth noting, 2 years ago, he did introduce a bill to license Times Square costumed characters like Elmo, Spider-Man, and Mickey Mouse. He acknowledged the council's inaction on oil theft doesn't look good.
This big bust of heating oil companies was in 2015. It's now the winter of 2017, 2018, and City Council has not done anything. Is that a failure?
That's a shame on everybody who was supposed to oversight, be responsible, and protect New York, and that goes from the administration and all of everyone who said that they made a commitment to serve New York.
Late today, a spokesman said Mayor de Blasio supports the heating oil bill and wants to see City Council vote on it. And BIC says there's no evidence the licensing fees would cost jobs. By the way, you might be wondering, what can you do to protect yourself from an oil thief this winter? Experts say the best way is when a fuel truck pulls up to your home, watch that truck like a hawk. A dishonest driver will be less likely to cheat you if you are standing over his shoulder. Back to you.
Okay.
Something else to make life a little more complicated.
So true, Chuck.